This story is interesting here because you have state senators in Texas. They're lobbying for a bill that allows for schools to do more in terms of discipline, to give schools more flexibility in how they discipline students. Now, the main question here is why? Why are they doing this? Why are they on this side of student discipline? Let's read and find out. Here we go. Senators soften student discipline bill, giving Texas schools more flexibility. The Texas Senate had previously proposed more severe consequences in the bill. The Texas Senate, in an about face, approved a sweeping rewrite of the state's student discipline laws that provides schools with more flexibility to manage student behavior. Seems like that's the way it should be. Let schools decide what is needed for their population of students. The final legislation, which included many amendments, moderated portions of the bill the Senate had previously sought to harden. The House must concur before it goes to the governor. So it hasn't gone through yet, and it's got to go through both houses and get a signature from the governor. But check this out. Check this out. This is from a state senator. He said, disruptions are impeding both the ability of teachers to teach and the ability of students to learn, said State Senator Charles Perry, who shepherded the bill in the Senate. We have attempted to draft a bill that achieves the goals of both the House and the Senate. The latest version, first of all, that's very interesting to hear a politician talk like that. Like he's not pulling this from nowhere. Like he's hearing this. And as a result, he's advocated for this bill. The latest version of House Bill 6 would allow schools to place students in school suspensions for as long as they see appropriate, so long as principals review the placement every 10 days. I like that. That's reasonable. Students facing in school suspension still complete schoolwork in a different classroom on school grounds. The bill clarifies that those students must be under the supervision of faculty. Of course. Of course. Obviously, right? The legislation also amends current law that requires schools to send students who are caught vaping to alternative education settings, a strict environment that often leans on computer based work and is in a different building. Now, again, like this comes from somewhere. Obviously, the people who wrote this bill, they've heard from concerned parents, concerned teachers, concerned administrators about what it's like going into these bathrooms and you've got 20 students in a stall and you just see this mystical haze that just quickly disappears and you're wondering, okay, who's got it? Who's got it? What's happening? So they're paying attention. Give give these politicians credit for that. They're listening, they're paying attention because that specifically to address if you're caught vaping, we're going to do this. That's compelling. At the very least, that's a compelling response. It makes me think. I'm not saying I'm for it 100%, but I would like to consider that because if you do something such as this, if they have to go to an alternative education setting because they've been caught vaping, perhaps that would be a deterrent for other students. And then that means that the rest of the student population, they can go into the restroom and it's free of vape smoke in the air and there's just one person in a stall at a time and there's not 80 people in the bathroom all together. That's interesting. It's compelling. The House wanted to repeal the law altogether. The Senate's version gives schools flexibility to hand students caught with a vape less severe consequences if it is their first offense. Okay, flexibility. And because the bill would allow schools to use out of school suspensions to discipline all students when they engage in repeated and significant classroom disruption or threaten the health and safety of other children, it would make it easier for schools to discipline homeless students and the state's youngest students. Now, again, those students in those categories, there would be there are just more there are more restrictions to disciplining to disciplining those students. But apparently they're hearing in Texas, and of course this happens in other areas, they're hearing in Texas that, hey, it's those students, we need to teach these students to make better decisions. So let's give schools the flexibility to do what they need to do to teach that lesson. That's because a bill would reverse state laws from 2017 and 19 that put limitations on when and how those students could be disciplined. Senators on Thursday acknowledged the challenges the youngest students face behaving in the classroom. An amendment Thursday will require schools to provide documentation. Of course, we've always got to have that, right? That's always been the case. A documentation of disruptive behavior before they doled out an out-of-school suspension to students in kindergarten through third grade. When schools consider removing students with disabilities, they must involve professionals who are knowledgeable about how disabilities manifest. Of course, we do this. We already do this. It's a manifestation hearing. That happens. That person may be a special education teacher, a social worker, or a school psychologist. Perry on Thursday said the legislation was 6 years in the making. This right here. He says, we've reached a crisis point. There's just some kids that absolutely are such a deterrent to the overall learning process that we have to find a better way. With that, House Bill number 6 found that balance. I like where we landed. But I mean, just like we've reached a crisis point where there's just some kids that absolutely are such a deterrent to the overall learning process that we have to find a better way. To hear a politician talk like that, wow. Wow. So we're going to keep an eye on this bill and see if it makes its way through the House and gets a signature from the governor. Being that it's Texas, I think the chances are pretty high that it will. But, we'll keep an eye on it. Well, that's our story for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.